I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian Mackenzie.
Part of the game.
Raise your hand, everybody, if you're excited for season 2 of the Chris Johnston Show.
Yeah!
Also, raise your hand if you're excited for training camp to start. We both have training camps to worry about in our respective cities. Siege, I'm excited.
It does not feel real, does it? It's such a long off season in some ways. Obviously, we enjoyed our downtime when we had it. I know you had a busy summer here, moving all the way out there to Calgary. You got a little new backdrop for season 2. Our Calgary man. But yeah, I'm excited. I'm ready to rock, and it's been enough sort of trying to project what's going to happen. Now we get to start to see on the ice what, who's good, who's not so good, which players have taken a step, and all those types of things.
I got to mention this. So before we started recording this episode, CJ had himself like his little coffee pot, and he was pouring himself some coffee. He was trying not to show it on air. I really want you to see it. So he's got his good coffee for those watching on YouTube. Yes, I am in Calgary now. That means I'm about 2 hours behind what CJ normally is. I know I'm a person who says that, okay, I'm going to have like one coffee a week. I think that number might change. I really think it might change now. I think I might end up being like one coffee a day at this point. I think I might need one.
I've had more than one coffee for every episode we've taped, like while we're recording. So, I mean, I'm obviously all on board with you doing that.
Okay.
You're going to have some early mornings, but I'm glad you're sticking with us, and we're going to have another great season, pal.
Remember, this is not work for me. That being said, I'll need anything I can to get myself going. I should mention, though, really happy to be back for season 2. Really happy that everyone is back for season 2, including producer Nick, obviously. And thank you to everyone who watched all the summer episodes and the mini episode as well. We really appreciate that. And we hope you enjoy what's to come for season 2. I mentioned training camp. There's one other thing that's been on my mind over the last few days. I noticed a lot of people have gotten themselves into, we're in Vegas for the NHL media tour. I unfortunately was not there. CJ, were you there? I don't think you were there.
I wasn't there this year. I have done a number of them over the years, though. It's funny. That is the real back to school moment, because all of a sudden, for anyone who doesn't know, that the league does 2 media tours now, one for European-based players and then one for North American guys. Each team tends to send one representative, sometimes 2. And basically, it's a day or 2 of just intense interviews, like one room after another for the players. If you're on the interviewing side, you literally do sometimes 20 interviews in a day. And so talk about, you go from summer where you haven't really necessarily thought about hockey to all of a sudden you got 20 one-on-one interviews. You got to be on your game. So, that usually was the true back to school moment for me. This year I didn't participate in the one in Vegas, but it looked like a lot of fun, and it's just a sign that the real season's around the corner.
Big shout out to producer Nick, though, because of all 3 of us for the CJ show, he was the only one who represented. Well, he technically was representing someone else, but he, we like to think of him as representing the CJ show in Vegas for the NHL media tour. Let's think. So you did kind of mention what normally happens in terms of the content and the access that you get. Like, how useful is it for journalists out there? Are you getting good stuff? Are you getting good content? I mean, it's one thing to get stuff you could just write about, but in terms of interacting with the players there, like, if you can just kind of add a little bit more description to what that's like.
I'd say it depends on what kind of schedule the players had. The one downside, I mean, look, it's an awesome thing the league does. Like, there's no point of criticism here or complaint, but just factually, it gets to the end of the day, and maybe a player's had to do an on-ice portion, for the cameras. Maybe he's done 10 or 12 previous interviews. Obviously, there's some overlap in the questions. It does vary on sort of where you find the player and how crazy his day has been. But I would say as a general rule, yeah, it's super valuable. It's very relaxed. Nothing started yet, right? I mean, as much as these guys are, they've trained their bodies to this point pretty hard to be ready for camp. They haven't really faced any pressure yet. There's no one's lost any games. No one's injured, for the most part, that's going to that event. So, it's a really nice time to catch up with the players. it's also changed over the years, Julian. I went to the first couple that they did. They started doing them in New York City. I'm going to say somewhere about 10 years ago. I don't know the exact date range. And in the beginning, there wasn't all that many of us that went down to it. It was actually the first one that I was at the league's head office in New York. And literally, I just sat in a boardroom at that time. And, Patrice Bergeron comes through, Sidney Crosby comes through, a variety of other players. And, that was immensely valuable. But, like anything else, as soon as that started happening, everybody wanted to send more. The rights holders send a whole bunch of people. I saw, I know Nick was down there as part of Sportsnet's brigade. It looked like everybody who works at Sportsnet and hockey was there. Jeff Merrick, Elliot Friedman, Steve Dangle, a host of others. Luke Fox was there. And so it's maybe become a little bit less intimate or one-on-one-ish. I will say, though, right before the pandemic, I think August 2019, I had a chance to go to Stockholm for the European-based one. And at that time, I don't know if it's still the case, it was way more relaxed. There was less media around. It was actually more into the summer too. It was a few weeks out from training camp instead of 1 week out. And it was tremendous, the access. And, it was a great spot to get stories too. I remember getting a good chat with William Nylander there, for example. He's someone I cover here in Toronto. It's just not as easy to get one-on-one time with him as with any Leaf, because there is so much coverage of that team. And so it's been really cool to do that. I'd love to go again. I didn't skip it for any particular reason this year. It just didn't align with my work schedule too well. But I think it's helpful for the league, and it's helpful for those players too. I mean, really, the reason it exists, sure, it's to generate publicity for the league, but it's trying to manage all the preseason asks of the players into one spot. And so I do know they go on the ice and do a bunch of other things. All those like crazy graphics you see at the start of an ESPN broadcast or what have you. I mean, they're largely shot there. And, it's a good thing, but it becomes a bit of a zoo now because, there's a lot of reporters that go down.
I imagine that's also where like the NHL shoots a lot of those like puck personality videos where they try to get all these players in different rooms and ask them, hey, what's your favorite concert you've ever been to? Or what's an artist you like or something like that, that they just randomly kind of drop throughout the year. It seems like it would be a cool thing. I'd love to be there one year.
You'll get there, man. Don't worry. It is a cool event. And it's just nice to see the players relax. That's the one thing. And it's certainly not a criticism of them during the season, but like when they're in work mode during the year, it's harder to get some personality out of the players. I think the season is just so demanding. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes with teams and what have you, but to see the guys relax, like I saw a clip from the 32 Thoughts podcast with Sidney Crosby, and he's talking about how many drinks he had at Nathan MacKinnon's Stanley Cup party. I mean, just stuff like that. I think fans like to see the human side of the players, and I think it's an excellent opportunity to tell those kind of stories, to get that kind of access and just ask those questions, right? I mean, it's a little bit less appropriate to start asking that and, once the season started or you're in work mode again in the dressing room.
I will put this out in the universe, live Chris Johnston show from the NHL media tour next season, wherever it happens to be.
We've never had a guest. That would require us to have guests. So we're going to have to evolve and change if we're ever doing that.
I mean, I guess and also, depending on who the guest is, if Sidney Crosby wants to hang out with us, come on.
Who are we to say like, no, this is a no guest podcast, Sid? Not today, not this time.
Okay, so we'll talk more about some of the different captain news. We'll touch off on the respective teams we're covering for training camp, and we will obviously get to your questions from Ask CJ. A lot of them coming through on Discord, by the way. But first, we must get to You Can Bet That with David Bastl. Yes, we are bringing it back for yet another season. As always, if you are on Sports Interaction, if you're playing only for those 19 and over, we ask that you play responsibly, and there is a link to responsible gaming strategies in the description of the show. Welcome to You Can Bet That with David Bastl, and David Bastl is here to hang out with us. How you doing, man?
Pretty good. Hockey's here. I'm looking forward to it.
Man, I'm looking forward to hanging out with you for this second season of the CJ Show. Let's get right into it with some of these prop bets up on Sports Interaction. By the way, you should hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. Let's start off with Austin Matthews. Does he hit 60 goals this season? Should people be betting over 60 goals? The line for that's at 2.26. If you're betting under 60 goals, that's at 1.57. How do you feel about that, David?
Well, the easy bet, guys, is to go under, right? Because 60 is so hard to do, CJ, as you know. He got to 60 last year. He also missed a couple of games because of injuries and just rest. Does he hit 61? Because he needs 61 to technically go over. That's tough to do.
It is. And the big question, and none of us have this answer, is how many games is he going to play? Because if you look at Austin Matthews' career, basically every season his goals per game rate has gone up. He was over 0.8 goals per game last season. If he played 82, that would have you safely above 60. But, obviously a difficult thing to replicate in itself. He had, by far his best NHL season last year. I don't think you can rule it out, though. I mean, look, 65 it was the high watermark by Alex Ovechkin kind of in this generation of players in the salary cap era. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Austin Matthews had that number in the back of his mind.
Remember last season when we had a handful of 50 goal scorers? Sports Interaction has something on that as well. Do you think we're going to have over five or more 50 goal scorers? That's at 3.20. No to having 5 or more 50 goal scorers for this coming season. That's at 1.30. David, where are you leaning towards?
I'm having a hard time getting to 5. Obviously Austin Matthews is the freebie on the bingo card, so we'll check off him. I have Leon Draisaitl in that category, and then you start to get a little bit iffy. I think Kyle Connor's in that conversation. Kaprizov's in that conversation. Could Matthew Tkachuk do it with his new team? And if he does, he's number 5 for me. I don't know about you guys, but I'm struggling to get to 4. 5 is a reach for me right now.
Yeah, I wonder about Connor McDavid. I think that he's one of those guys that he sort of said he wants to score a little bit more. Maybe he could get there. Chris Kreider had a special season last year. Could he repeat it? Yeah, I'm kind of with you, though. 5, you need to line a lot of things up for 5, but, we have seen offense league-wide go on the upswing here, and so maybe we get it. That'd be great for the fans.
And no disrespect to Alex Ovechkin. I know he hit 50, but it's got to start soon, right? Alex Ovechkin has a good year if he hits 45, 46. That's great, but 50? He can do it, but I don't have him in this club this year.
I am all for more scoring. So if we can have more of those 50 goal scorers, I am all for it. One last one for you, David.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is especially of a lot of Montreal Canadiens fans might be into this next one. Kirby Dach's point totals for this coming season. Over 35.5. That line for that is at 1.85. Under 35.5. That's also at 1.85. This kind of, you could correct me if I'm wrong. The tallies here being kind of even. That's a really interesting line for Kirby Dach and his point totals.
Yeah, 50-50 proposition, right? He scored 26 last year and 70. I think he can get there. The Canadiens have high hopes, extension as well, as you know, CJ. So he's going to get his time. He's going to get his minutes. I'm not sure where he's going to play exactly, but could he get to that? Yeah, I think so. I would bet the over on Kirby Dach.
Yeah, that's what I'm feeling too. He's got a coach that wants his players to think offensively and play offensively. He hasn't done this in the NHL yet, but he's still on the upswing of his career. I think the over is probably the safest bet here.
Just as important, Kirby Dach also really wants to work with Martin St. Louis in Montreal. Don't forget to check out sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of the best odds before game, in game, and the best props. Again, sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. David Bastl, thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Thanks, guys.
So there's a lot we need to get to. In particular, some storylines revolving captaincies, a situation in Winnipeg where they don't have a captain, and a situation in Montreal where not only do they have a captain, they've named this player the youngest captain in team history. Which of these two stories in Winnipeg and Montreal interests you more?
Well, probably a team removing its captain. Let's be honest. It's happened. It's not a first in NHL history, but it doesn't happen a whole lot. And so I think that it offers, there's a little bit more room for analysis on why that might happen versus, I think with Nick Suzuki, it's a natural choice. I've seen a bunch of his former teammates, Philip Deneau actually at the NHL media tour mentioning like it didn't surprise him at all that he was a natural next selection. So I think that the removing of a captaincy is always a little bit more surprising than someone being named one.
For sure. For some added context with the Winnipeg situation, yes, Blake Wheeler was captain for a couple of seasons. The C has been taken off of him. I don't know if it's convenient, but it's kind of interesting that I believe for the last few years he had like a no movement clause in his deal, and it looks as if there's a modified no trade that's kind of kicking in for this year. Mark Scheifele told Sportsnet he was a bit surprised at this happening. How do you feel about this situation? What does this mean for Blake Wheeler and the Jets going forward for this coming year with Rick Bowness in his first year as head coach there?
Well, let's start with the team, right? Because as much as this is about an individual, it's about an organizational shift too. And you go back to the Jets, they were in the Western Conference Final against the Vegas Golden Knights, 2017, 5 years ago. I mean, I think a lot of us, I covered that series on the ground. I think a lot of us thought, oh, wow, like Winnipeg, this is going to be a team that's got a chance to win a cup. Each of these, for the next 5 or 7 years, it's so many great young players. You still have a lot of those great young players. They've maybe aged a little bit, but they haven't come close to that level of success since. And so I think it's only natural. I'd say it's fair to say they've been a little bit of a disappointment. Last season in particular was just not a good year in Winnipeg. I think that there's a lot of sort of outside reasons that might have happened. Having Paul Maurice step down as their coach midseason, was a difficult thing for them, and they never really kind of got back on track after that point in time. But I think it does make sense if you're looking at the Jets as a whole. They obviously haven't met their own goals, and so you got to try something new. You've changed up the coaching staff now. I think the style of play they try to roll it on the ice is going to be different. And Blake Wheeler's held that captaincy since 2016. So I don't know if it's such a direct indictment of him individually, but it's certainly things weren't working well there. There's lots of talk of sort of a dressing room divide or division. I think that they have to sort of start fresh, and so it makes a whole lot of sense. Blake Wheeler himself said he was caught off guard, or that he was surprised by it, that he didn't see it coming. But he's a pro, and I don't expect it to necessarily change anything about him, but it certainly is indicative of a different approach for that entire team, that organization, and the way they operate.
You mentioned him being a pro. I'm trying to think of if it's ever happened before, or how many times it's happened where a guy has the C removed and stays with the team, tries to play through whatever situation they're in, or at the very least has not asked for a trade or anything like that. I'm very curious about how Blake Wheeler responds to this, because he could easily just say, well, you know what, if you're not going to make me captain of this team, just put me on another team that, at least help me win, or at least closer to contention, because Winnipeg is still in that very weird stage where, are they a contending team? I don't think they really are necessarily anymore, even though they have all those players that they have. I don't know. It's a really interesting situation with Blake.
It is. Look, but there was trade talk around him this offseason. It's a difficult cap hit to move. I mean, we'll hear that a lot with a number of players we might talk about potentially being traded throughout this season. But it's no secret that there's not an abundance of cap space out there in general in the league. And so, the reality is he might have to stay. But it's happened, and guys have been plenty successful. I mean, Joe Thornton is the most famous one I can think of in recent memory. Had the captaincy removed in San Jose, stayed on with that team, had all kinds of success. I believe they might have changed captains there a couple times. Patrick Marleau, I kind of forget the chain of events in San Jose, but they definitely moved the captaincy around and still kept a lot of those same pieces for years on end, and they made it work fine. I think it's an awkward conversation, I would imagine. It's not probably a pleasant feeling for Blake Wheeler, but when you break it all down, he's paid to play hockey. The move's been made now. I expect he'll come to camp and do what he's done. I mean, he's authored a pretty nice career if you look from where he began to the career he's had. I mean, he's been someone who found a way to elevate maybe a little bit later on past where you expect a player to have his prime. And while he is on the wrong side of 30 in terms of having a lot of years left, I don't necessarily see this as something that has to be a pure schism between him and the team. I mean, there's probably a little bit of licking the wounds time required because it's public, right? That's the whole thing about a captaincy. It's on one hand, I'm always, when you're in a marketplace where a team doesn't have a captain, it gets discussed a lot with the local media. It's on the radio or podcast, what have you, fans to debate it. But it sort of doesn't matter, but it does. I mean, it's a ceremonial role in a lot of ways. There's a practical side to it. You know, captains, for example, usually work with the head coaching staff the head coach and the staff to sort of plan what days are off days and practice days and how the team travels. And there is some practical sides to it, but it's sort of a, you know, it's emblematic of something. And that emblem has been taken off, you know, Blake Wheeler's sweater now. And so we all know about it. We're talking about it. So you kind of have to take your laundry. That doesn't all get kept in house when you do something like this. But, you know, I think for the Jets, quite honestly, look, if you look at their offseason, Julian, they didn't really change a whole lot, right? I mean, a couple players out the door in free agency, a couple new guys in. You know, they signed Sam Gagner here at the end of the summer to you know, replace some veteran minutes that they lost with Paul Stastny moving on to Carolina. But, you know, they didn't change a lot functionally about their team beyond the coaching staff. So I think this is a natural next change because they view themselves maybe not as a top tier contender, but they're trying to win. I mean, make no mistake about it. They have when he's on and Connor Hellebuck, you know, a top 5 goaltender in the league. They have a lot of offensive scoring threats. Defensively is where the team has never been able to really get over the hump. I mean, when at best Hellebuck's bailed them out. When they're at their worst, they've just kind of left them out to dry. They've never been a really good team with shot share and you know, trying to limit the chances on their own end. I would suspect that's a huge point of ask for Rick Bowness. You know, it's something, frankly, the Dallas Stars did very well under him, right? They were a team that, you know, we saw them play all the way to the Stanley Cup final in the bubble in 2020. You know, they did that largely on the strength of their defense. And they did it not with their starting goaltender at the time. You know, it was Hudobin that carried the net because Ben Bishop was out injured. And so, you know, I think that you're going to see a lot of changes in Winnipeg, even though they didn't change a ton of personnel. And this is just a natural next step to me.
So what about Nick Suzuki in Montreal being named team captain, the youngest captain in team history out there? I know I've written about the fact that other guys in the system like a Brendan Gallagher or Joel Edmondson could get consideration for something like this. But they gave it to Nick Suzuki, who, look, he's going to be around with this team for a very long time. I think this year's the first year of that extension that he signed last year. How do you feel about Nick Suzuki being captain of the Montreal Canadiens?
Well, what's interesting about it is, you know, on one hand, I'm talking about it doesn't matter, but in a place like Montreal, it does matter, right? And we've already seen the subject of this captaincy, you know, get dragged into some of the provincial election stuff that's going on with politicians, you know, demanding he speak French or speak more French and all this. And you know, without addressing that issue specifically, it's a sign of how important the team is in the province. It's not a typical kind of NHL franchise, of course, not just because of their past success, but I think just because of the intense passion that is around them. And so what makes that interesting for me is that they've chosen someone in his early 20s to do it. When, you know, Brendan Gallagher, you know, who I think a lot of us thought was probably going to be the next captain over the years. I mean, it just appeared that he would be next in succession, if you will, because of what he's meant to the team, the heart and soul way that he plays. You know, obviously signed a long-term contract himself. So, you know, while he's getting up there in age, there's no reason to expect he's moving on anytime soon. But, you know, the other side of the coin there is that this is kind of a refresh, a reboot, a rebuild, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it probably makes sense to have the next sort of generation of the team grow up under someone like Nick Suzuki. And so, you know, I'm not by any means questioning his capabilities, but it's a lot to put on a younger guy. You know, that's just a fact. And it says a lot that they have the comfort to do so. And, you know, I think it says a lot about him that Martin St. Louis approached him in July about it. And, you know, he didn't really make the decision until September. I mean, it's not that he was necessarily toying with saying no, but he certainly had to think about it a little bit before saying yes. And so, you know, I like the move, but, you know, it is going to be a lot more on his shoulders. And, you know, I think that'll be something to watch this season with the Canadiens, just how he handles that. You know, I think he's handled himself quite well, frankly, through some of this debate about his language skills and all of that. And, you know, I don't see any reason to think that'll change, but, you know, his life will change now as an NHL player. There's just going to be a lot more for him to work through than just, you know, trying to be in the best shape he can to be mentally where he needs to be to perform on the ice.
Yeah, I think he'll be okay with that responsibility. He seems mature enough to handle it. The language thing for me, I mean, I just think it's a bit opportunist with, you mentioned there is a provincial election. We're on the cusp. Quebec is on the cusp of that. I think a lot of that is a little bit advantageous. No disrespect to anyone running, but like, I think that's what it is really.
Get your newspaper, man.
Yeah, come on. Like I see what's going on here, but no, I think Nick Suzuki should be fine with the C. I understand it is going to be a lot of pressure on him, but yeah, I think it's a lot of nothing with the whole language debate thing. But we don't need to rehash any more talk about la langue française au Québec. We don't need to do that with Nick Suzuki. We can move on to something else like Nathan MacKinnon and the fact that he could be due for a pretty hefty raise fairly soon. It seems as if he and the Avalanche are pretty close to a contract extension.
It seems like they're going to get there, but, my eyebrows were raised a little bit at some of Nathan MacKinnon's comments out of the media tour in Vegas, because, he did sort of express some degree of surprise that it's taken a little longer than he would have thought. It almost seems like it would be automatic, right? He's had so many great seasons earning, what was a below market rate because of the contract he signed way back when. And, it was their opportunity after winning a Stanley Cup to reward him. I have full confidence they're going to, by the way. And I'm not at all anticipating that this will go off the rails. But, he also mentioned he wants it done by the start of the season. So he's imposing a little bit of a deadline here to get things done. I think that it will happen. I imagine it will probably set up quite nicely, maybe with the team coming back to training camp at some point, that they can have a press conference and make it official. And, look, everyone in that organization has a right to feel good about themselves. With the season they just had, finally getting over the hump and winning a cup. And I think it'll be a great moment for the team to get Nathan MacKinnon locked up long term. But it's not been a straight just, hey, write down your number on a piece of paper and we'll turn that into a legal document and pay you that. I think that there is a negotiation going on. Remains to be seen. I think what a lot of us are looking for is he going to crest Connor McDavid's $12.5 million in terms of an AAV on the contract? I think he has a case to do so. Which is not saying that I think he's better than Connor McDavid, but one thing to consider is that when Connor McDavid signed his deal, it was a certain percentage of the cap. The cap has gone up, even though it hasn't gone up in these recent years. It's gone up since McDavid signed that deal. And I think MacKinnon, could build a credible case to be paid somewhere in that same percentage range, and it would probably take his number higher. We'll see how it comes out in the wash, but I do think it's possible he ends up as the highest paid player in the league, but it's not a guarantee. And that's some of the details that are still being worked out here, is just settling on what exactly this deal looks like. But, it'll be no mystery. It's going to be a long-term contract, something in the 7-8 year range. And as MacKinnon said himself, it's not going to be single digits. So it's 10 million or above. And clearly the class of player we're talking about, that's where he belongs.
It's kind of interesting that he mentioned, hey, it's not going to be in single digits. This is a guy who I think probably had like the best value contract in the league the last how many years. Doesn't that, not to kind of put words in his mouth, but like kind of interesting that he would single out the fact that no, it's not going to be in single digits. It's kind of obvious, but not a lot of other players would go so far as to say that.
Yeah, I actually welcome how open he is. I like MacKinnon. Like I find him. He's always been pretty forthright with things the times I've been around him in a professional setting. So I think that I've got no problem with him saying that. I think, it's also, he deserves it. At the end of the day, and deserve, I realize it could be a tricky word for a person out there working what we might call a more normal job. And, the difference between 7, 8, 9, 10 million, it's just like, it's almost impossible for the average person, including myself, to wrap our minds around that kind of money. But if you look at his peers in the league, the fact that he's, been a top scorer the last number of seasons, he's been nominated for the Hart Trophy more than once. He clearly deserves to be paid like Austin Matthews, like Nathan MacKinnon, or Artemi Panarin, all those guys up in that range. And we'll just see where it ends up. The thing I feel bad for players about, honestly, is in a hard cap system, there is some pressure on them, either implicitly or explicitly, depending what's said at the negotiating table, to help the team still be competitive. And so if Nathan MacKinnon jumps from $6.5 million to $13 million, for example, if that were to happen, it's going to be harder for the Avalanche to build a team around him, especially starting next season when that deal would kick in, because, we're not anticipating a big salary cap jump for next year. But, on the flip side of that's why the GM, and the front office staff get paid what they do. That's why, that's their job to figure that out. But I do think it creates an interesting wrench in some of these negotiations. We're going to see it again when it comes time, for example, for Austin Matthews to do an extension with the Maple Leafs. And I think that, it's not that anyone with the Leafs will have necessarily to put that out loud, but it would be in the back of the player's mind too, that as much as you want to keep pushing forward, because, when one player moves the bar up, everybody else benefits, I would argue. I mean, the next star, if Nathan MacKinnon becomes the highest paid player in the league, by average annual value, the next star that signs is probably going to make a little bit more as a result of that. I mean, that's the way the system works. So on one hand, you have the other players in the league wanting you to make as much as you can because it's probably good for everyone, but it also creates some complications for your team. And I would think when it's all said and done, what matters most to Nathan MacKinnon, sure, he wants to be paid fairly, but he probably wants another chance or 2 or 3 at lifting that Stanley Cup, because it tends to be pretty addictive when you get a chance to do it.
Especially when you have Sidney Crosby hanging out at your Stanley Cup parties, enjoying some brewskis.
Well, he knows that the kid's brought that cup back 3 times. No one will have to remind him that. So he's brought it back once, but that's how athletes are hardwired. You can be sure he's going to want to do it at least a second time and maybe a third to match his good friend and one-time idol.
Anything on David Pastrnak? He recently said he's pretty happy in Boston, but we know he is due for a contract in the near future. Anything on him?
Well, there've been talks there with the Bruins, about an extension. I think it's a bit of a crossroads season. I believe in Boston in a lot of ways. They got the band back together for one more year. David Krejci came back from Czech Republic, obviously one more year for Patrice Bergeron. But, I think David Pastrnak needs to have some level of comfort about the organization's commitment or ability to keep competing if he's going to sign a long-term deal. It doesn't sound like anything's imminent. I'm not sure it needs to be at this point in time, but this will certainly be a discussion point through the year. And I think there's a lot of pressure on management here because it is this season where certainly the Bruins are intending to be competitive. That they've got some significant hurdles right out of the gate with Brad Marchand's going to miss a big chunk of the start of the season. Charlie McAvoy is going to be out. I mean, they're going to have to weather some absences, but they're attempting to win a Stanley Cup this year, and so it's not as though if David Pastrnak isn't signed by the deadline, he's being traded. I wouldn't think, but there is the risk, of course, that you walk him right to free agency, and you have a situation like John Tavares or some of the others in the past where a team loses a cornerstone player and doesn't get anything back in return. And so I think that will be kind of an interesting dynamic to monitor. At this point in time, I don't get the feeling though that anything's close, that there's no deadlines being imposed here. It's just more, probably a conversation that will continue to happen, and we'll see where they end up. I do think we should take David Pastrnak at his word. He does love Boston. Obviously, it's been a great situation for him, but you don't necessarily want to be the one guy that signs a long-term deal and is grinding it through a rebuild either. And so, that's some of what I think has to kind of be managed there. And then obviously finding a contract that makes both the team and player happy.
Over the last few days, just kind of going from topic to topic just quickly here, there seems to have finally been a resolution in the case with Evander Kane and the San Jose Sharks, as both sides have agreed to a contract termination. Any other context we can add to that, or is it pretty straightforward?
Well, it's straightforward in the sense that basically Evander Kane was made whole. The difference in what was remaining on his deal when the Sharks terminated that contract and what he got paid on the extension he signed in Edmonton is essentially being made up in terms of actual money that he'll receive from the team. I think what's interesting is the Sharks themselves had the monetary part of that applied to last year's cap. And so there's no actual punitive nature for them moving forward. For example, way back when the Kings had a case like this with Mike Richards, they are incurring a small cap charge, I believe still to this day. But certainly for a number of years after that, there was a cap charge that was applied to them based on what they settled with Mike Richards. This isn't the same case for San Jose. So the Sharks have the ability to spend right up into the cap ceiling. There's no issues pertaining to that. But the player does get made whole financially, which, is obviously important for him. So, I guess it's the best possible outcome. Ultimately, it made the most sense, I think, for them to settle between themselves with the league and the NHL Players Association involved too. Because if they went through with the arbitration and the arbitrator ruled, it could have been all one way or all another. In other words, it could have been the contract is void and Evander Kane gets no extra money, or it could have been that, hey, he's reawarded to the Sharks, and that would have been. I don't think that would have been in anyone's best interest at this point. Obviously, he's found some comfort in Edmonton. He signed a long-term deal there this year after signing there midway through last season, and so I think that the books close and allows everyone to move on pretty amicably, so to speak. I mean, there's no future problems here for the team or the player. They basically get to move on, and I'm sure they're not looking back.
Speaking of moving on, the dossier for Rasmus Sandin. You're based in Toronto. A lot of people are going to ask you about Rasmus Sandin. We have to get to this situation. Do you have any updates on that?
The latest update as of Monday morning is that the sides are talking, which is, I think, encouraging. It's kind of a strange contract, right? I mean, we can get into Jason Robertson or maybe some of the other situations where there actually is a huge range of what that deal might look like depending on the length and all that. I think with the Rasmus Sandin case, it's almost assuredly going to be a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal he signs in Toronto. It'd be a surprise to me anyway if he signed anything other than for those term lengths. And, he's played approximately 80 NHL games career. So, I mean, there's not a huge variance between what he's asking and what the Leafs are offering. But there's still enough of a gap there that he's back in Sweden as we're recording this, skating on his own with some coaches on the ice, but there's no NHL players left to be skating with for him there. Everyone's, come back to their NHL cities that he would have worked out with through the summer. And, training camp opens with medicals on Wednesday and on ice sessions on Thursday. And it's appearing, less and less likely, I suppose, that he'll be there. Although keep in mind, often these deals get done right at that moment. And then the player flies and maybe only misses a day or two. That's what happened with Mitch Marner, for example. That's what happened with David Pastrnak back on his second NHL contract. I think he missed a day of Bruins training camp, but, signed his deal right as it was opening and ended up joining the team pretty early on. And this would be an important training camp for Sandin. Because, there's been some questions a little bit about sort of maybe not his work ethic, but his conditioning from Sheldon Keefe. He's kind of brought that up in the past. I think, young players don't always put on muscle the way you'd want. And so I do think that him getting in and having a strong camp could benefit him in terms of being ready for the season. But, the business side has to get done first. And, the other thing, too, is I've heard and haven't been able to confirm 100%, but there's apparently a couple Leafs players that are injured too that won't be ready to start the season, and that could impact the situation too. I mean, certainly from a cap perspective, I think it might make things a little bit easier for the Leafs if they have to start with players on long-term injured reserve. When you go to Puckpedia or Cap Friendly and look at their contract picture, I think some people are scratching their heads about how they can get under the cap. I think that will be one way to facilitate it, but there's a lot of different dynamics at play. And I think the fact that the sides are talking, should point us towards a resolution being reached. But, the last I'd heard, the Leafs were sticking pretty hard on a 1-year offer at his qualifying offer number, which is, somewhere in the 800,000s, that they were willing to do a 2-year deal at the same deal that Timothy Liljegren signed at 1.4 million times 2. I'd heard that Sandin's camp countered with a 1-year offer at 1.4, somewhere in that neighborhood anyway. And so, look, they're a couple $100,000 apart. That there should be a solution here, but it hasn't yet manifested itself.
Wow, thank you for the insight on the back and forth with the counter offers. That's pretty revealing, actually. Now that I think about it. Well,
I think it's natural, and look.
Well, yeah.
The thing that's happened here is, Mikey Anderson signed a deal in LA at 1 year, $1 million. Maybe that's, you might say that's a reasonable comparison for Sandin. A player, again, has established himself, played a lot of minutes in LA last year, but hasn't done it year after year after year. He's still a young guy. I mean, maybe that's the solution if the Sandin, ends up wanting a 1-year deal. But the point is they're within range. It's not, I think like if you look at the Jason Robertson situation with the Dallas Stars, if he does a 3-year deal or a 7 or 8-year deal, there's a huge variance in what that might look like. I think, with the seasons he's had, he's coming off a 40-goal year. I mean, bonus payments and those types of things could come into play a little bit more. Sandin's still at the point where he's establishing himself. Whereas I think there's an argument to be made based on the 2 seasons, full years that Jason Robertson had as an NHL player that he's already there. And so it becomes down to what the team can afford. Do they want to lock him up long-term, or does a bridge deal make the most sense? I think when you get in that situation, there's more dynamics at the bargaining table. Whereas this one, where I do believe it's going to be a short-term deal, someone's going to have to move. And the truth is the team doesn't have to move. The team can just say, hey, this is the offer, take it or leave it. And then the player says, okay, well, I'm not taking it. And training camp starts and different pressures come in. Obviously, reporters will be talking about this a lot more into this next week if he remains unsigned. And so that's kind of where we're at. But I don't see a reason it shouldn't get done. Honestly, I think it's in the team and the players' mutual interest to have him be ready for the season to play a more meaningful part of the Leafs next year. But remains to be seen. They gotta get it done first.
You mentioned Jason Robertson. Any updates on his situation in Dallas?
Well, he's going to make a lot of money. I
Yes.
think if you're looking at a 3-year term for him, probably something above what Elias Pettersson signed in Vancouver, which is north of $7 million. I think if he gets into a 6 or 7 or 8-year deal, he's getting into the sort of Mikko Rantanen and Mitch Marner territory. Somewhere between $9.5 and $11 million. Texas is a tax-free state. There's some incentives there maybe for him not to push for exactly the Mitch Marner deal, but something in that range, I think is fair. There's just been very few players. I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to comparables, right? And he's played over 100 NHL games. He's just a hair under a point per game over those games. He's coming off a season where he was better than a point per game player. He scored 41 goals in not quite a full 82-game season. He missed some time. And, there's very few guys other than, say, a Matthews or McDavid back when that had those kind of platform seasons entering their second NHL contract. And so, I think that there's a choice for the team to be made, that there's some cap considerations. Ideally, you probably want to pay him now and just lock him in for the meat of his career. Because if you did sign a long-term deal, that's you'd be guaranteeing yourself pretty assuredly his best seasons, but it's going to come at a pretty high cost. And I know Tom Ghilardi, the Stars owner, was on a podcast that at some point over the summer, and I saw the clip bouncing around. Like he doesn't like the idea of having to pay someone so young in their career, but if you look at the league-wide trend, I don't see how they get around that. And Dallas is a team that needs offense too. I mean, there's a different pressure point here, even in the Sandin case. I mean, this is a absolutely key member of their team, who I think it would be hard for the Stars to play without. And so, I think that they're under a little bit more heat to bring him in. It's not to diminish Sandin's role with the Leafs, but they have Morgan Riley and Jake Muzzin and Mark Giordano signed that can play the left side of their blue line. They have some comfort there. I think if for some reason they aren't able to get Sandin signed, that they can move forward. But to me, Dallas needs this player signed, and it's kind of incumbent upon them to find the solution.
Siege, we got you to talk a lot about hockey and news and notes and stuff. You've earned your time to answer fun questions and Ask CJ. The segment is back, people. We got all your questions off of Twitter and on Discord. Shout out to Discord, by the way. I don't think I've ever seen this many questions pop up on our Discord.
Bumping. Do you know what's funny?
Yeah.
It's just as an aside, James Myrtle was texting me and he's like, no more movie segments, please. It's painful. he finds it like he can't believe the movies I haven't heard of. So we've had at least one, as much as some people like the movie segments, we've had some people like just saying it's like so awkward hearing me just fumble around trying to think of a plot for a movie I should know about.
Okay, but how about this, though? There are people on Discord who think you should be recommended like one movie a month, so that way you can at least be up on that. Like, would you be okay with recommendations from people about like, hey, you should watch this movie this month instead of you fumbling around with the plot?
I think that's happening, actually. I think that we're going to have the people choose a movie, once a month or so, and I'm going to put together a couple-minute kind of review of it. So we haven't ironed out all the details, but I know from a high level, the SDPN boys like it. I think producer Nick's on board. We have to figure out some of the logistics of it. But CJ's movie review is coming to a YouTube channel near you.
And that, my friends, is called a tease. Also, I should mention, Insider J Money, big fan of CJ, of course. I know you handed in a lot of questions on Twitter. The reason why you're not in this today is because you asked a question that I think is a really good idea that we could probably do on Thursday's edition of the CJ Show. That is also called a tease. Let's get started with this first question off Discord. The guy's name, or the person's name, is Ever Been McMiked. I don't know what that is supposed to mean, but that sounds pretty interesting. If I wanted to get my friend into hockey, what team should I tell them to watch this season?
Wow, great question.
It's a great question.
I mean, you can't go wrong with Colorado. Like, to me, not just that they won the cup, like I think that they played some of the most exciting games of last season. They're just such a high octane team. So I think that if you're trying to sort of extol the virtues of pretty hockey, of nice individual plays, watching Cale Makar and Nathan MacKinnon do their thing is a pretty good sales point for the sport. If you're into drama, I mean, you probably should be watching the Leafs. There's always some kind of drama and sometimes storylines and those types of things draw people in. An organization that gets so much right but can't get their ultimate thing right is pretty alluring in every sport. I got some friends that are Tottenham fans in the Premier League, and they tell me it's kind of a similar kind of vibe that goes around that team. I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan in the NFL. Reminds me a little bit of there's some crossover there. Just because it's not like they're terrible every year, but they just haven't had the ultimate success in a long time. So those are the two that jump to mind. And obviously Edmonton, Connor McDavid's still, for my money, the best individual performer in the league and does things that literally nobody else has ever been able to do in the game. So between watching him or Cale Makar or Austin Matthews, I think that those are some, even if you don't understand hockey, if you don't know all the rules, I feel like you watch them enough, you're going to see some things and go like, wow, this is special.
Next one from M. Vogliano 25. How do you guys feel about fans wearing jerseys to a game of a team that's not playing, like wearing a Penguins jersey at a Leafs versus Canadiens game?
I actually love it because it makes me laugh when I'm at a game and I see that. Like why is so-and-so like I like when someone wears an old jersey too, like when it's just like some player from like the 90s or something. And you're like, wow, like how long has that been sitting in a closet? And you're dusting that off. So I like the personally, I realize some might call it like kind of a foul or whatever, but I think wear whatever jersey you want to games. I mean, this is supposed to be fun. And I think it's pretty cool. I mean, when I was a kid, I only ever had a couple jerseys, but it was always a big deal to get a jersey with someone's name on it. I mean, you should wear that thing with pride, no matter which teams are playing.
Considering how expensive jerseys are, I think getting mad about them wearing a jersey that has nothing to do with the game, maybe it's a bit much. So yeah, I'm with you on that. I agree.
What was your first jersey? Did you ever have one as a kid or?
The very first jersey. So there was a lot of those. It's actually kind of funny because there was this like West Indian store, like not too far from where I was living with my parents. And my mom would like buy these like fake jerseys. And they weren't even a Canadiens jersey. I think I got one from like an aunt, like when I was really young. But my mom bought these like fake like Leafs and Senators jerseys. And once upon a time, there was a time growing up in Quebec where if you wanted to watch hockey in English, like you had to go watch what was on the CBC. And more often than not, you were watching Leafs and Senators games. So I was watching those teams a lot. Well, I wouldn't say I was a fan of either of them, but those jerseys came into use. But yeah, it was probably one of those like kind of fake looking Leafs or Sens jerseys or something.
One of my coolest Christmas presents as a kid was getting a Doug Gilmour jersey, kind of in the height of his time with the Leafs. It had I remember it had the alternate captain A on it. Kind of an old school vintage one. It's still somewhere. Like I don't have it in my closet today, but it's probably at my dad's house or something. But I remember just loving that jersey and wearing it everywhere. I had a Wayne Gretzky too as a kid. An Oilers Wayne Gretzky, and it was pretty cool. And it was actually the style of jersey they've gone back to now a little bit, the blue and orange sort of oil drop jersey. And that was a classic. I was a big Gretzky fan as a kid.
Man, those are some really nice jerseys. The jersey I treasure the most now is a Syracuse Crunch orange jersey that I got as a parting gift after I finished my internship with them there. And I remember wearing it. Speaking of wearing jerseys that have nothing to do with the game being played, this friend of mine, Scott Matlow, works at Habs Eyes on the Prize, came into town from the States, and we were watching a Canadiens Flyers game. And I had the brilliant idea of thinking, oh, hey, I'll just wear this Syracuse Crunch jersey that's orange, and no one will think I'm cheering for the Habs or the Flyers. The Flyers are orange. So, of course, people thought I was a Flyers fan that day.
Not your best one. I also have a Tony Romo jersey, but no more on that.
Okay. We don't need to go more on Tony Romo. I do have a baseball question for you from Cross-Checked for Cancer. Do the Jays make the playoffs, or do they fall into another slump?
Oh, they're making the playoffs. I think the question now is, are they the first, second, or third wild card? I'd obviously love them to be the first wild card. That means they play all home games with the way the new baseball playoff system works. They'd host a best of three with all the games at Skydome, and I am 100% committed to overpaying for whatever those tickets cost to try to try to at least get to one of those games should they be played here. So I don't think I have no concerns, honestly, that they're going to miss the playoffs, but I'm most closely watching whether they can secure that first wild card spot so that I can get to a game.
Nick Dumoulin on Twitter. What are your realistic expectations for the Ottawa Senators this season? And do you think they're legit?
This is such a polarizing team. Like, I'm so confused by the way the Senators are discussed. Like, I'm not here to like kick anyone. The Senators are in the toughest division in hockey for my money. And I don't see them making up 20 or whatever points they would have to get to really get in the playoff conversation. That being said, I love their summer, and I'm glad their fan base is energized and excited. They should be. Like, it's nice to see that team go out and get a familiar face, a big name like Claude Giroux. Obviously, the trade for Alex DeBrincat, locking up Tim Stützle and Josh Norris to 8-year extensions. Making some moves in their net. Getting rid of Matt Murray, who let's face it, just didn't work out as a member of the Senators. Getting Cam Talbot in. Like, I think that everyone that's a Senators fan, and let's face it, that's a bit of a long-suffering fan base, should be totally pumped about the team. That being said, I just don't see them surpassing all of Florida, Tampa, Boston, and Toronto to be a playoff team. They still have to contend with Buffalo and Detroit too. I think both of those teams should be better this season. I'm not sure where the Canadiens are going to be. Certainly I don't think they're a playoff team, but I don't know how bad they'll be is probably the best way to put it. I mean, this is a team that finished last overall last year. I'm not sure in fact, I don't think they're that bad this time around, but it's sort of unclear, what you're going to get from them. And I just think, so it's a competitive, difficult division. I don't see Ottawa making the playoffs, but I certainly see them being better than where they've been the last couple seasons.
From Prong B11, what's a team that almost made a move or signing that would have had us looking at them completely different than we do now?
Probably the Devils. I think the Devils kind of are below the radar this year. And for me, they're one of the teams that I think are poised to take a big step forward. It makes sense. Look, they've been not a pressing concern the last number of seasons. So they've, accumulated some high draft picks. Those players are now ready, in my eyes, to break out. I think Jack Hughes is a great breakout candidate. I mean, he's already sort of broken out in the past, but I could see him, certainly having his best season as an NHL player. And I think sort of below the radar, they're a team that they're a team I could see jumping up and making the playoffs, that hasn't been in there the last couple of years. But they were also in the mix for Johnny Gaudreau. They need more, they feel they need more high impact or difference-making type of guys. And so they didn't end up getting Gaudreau, but, if that move had gone through, I think there would be more hype about them. If they went out and made that kind of splash. It wasn't for lack of trying. I think that they were at least kicking around the Matthew Tkachuk trade talks. I mean, I sense that was a organization that tried to get a lot more done this offseason than it managed to. That being said, I still think that they're in a good spot to take a step forward, and let's see what happens during the year. I mean, if that was the case in the offseason and the team performs on the ice, there's no reason to think they won't be a trade deadline player as well.
From Joko Matt 15 off Discord. Now that Coburg has a Starbucks, would you say that it's now complete?
It's an elite town. I'll tell you that much. I couldn't believe Coburg got a Starbucks. I couldn't believe that felt like it never happened. So when I was a kid, Julian, Coburg fought to not let Walmart in. Ultimately, Walmart did get in, but the town literally kept Walmart out forever. So it was not really a town that had all the brands or whatever. And so I never really thought I'd see a Starbucks there. I think that there might be 4 or 5 Tim Hortons now in Coburg. It's a real Timmy Hose kind of town, but Starbucks got in there. I've been through the Starbucks drive through a couple times, and I very much appreciate that, it's coming into the 21st century there in Coburg.
I appreciate you also saying Timmy Hose as well, as someone who also uses that term.
Well, yeah, it's so my dad, for example, Coburg Papa, I don't think he's going to Starbucks, but
no.
Yeah, he meets his buddies though every Wednesday morning, and they have Tim Hortons. So, it's maybe going to take a little while to break in and become mainstream in Coburg, but I'm going to try to keep it in business in the meantime.
Just single-handedly, you just driving through, just ordering 20 different coffees or something. I don't know. That's funny. All right. From Kayla McKenzie on Twitter, at Reporter Chris, what's your favorite thing about your host, JKA McKenzie? asks CJ. You better answer this question.
I know. I actually answered on Twitter. I was like, we might need 2 full episodes to go deep on that one. But I'd say the thing I like most about my host is he doesn't have a bad day. He always shows up prepared, in a great mood, and he makes us a lot of fun. So Julian's a great guy. I'm so happy for your success, but I know I said that in our mini-sode, but I'm excited to see all the things you're going to do out there in Calgary. It's cool. You're getting some new career opportunities and challenges, and I'm just happy to be along for the ride, the rocket ship to the top that you're riding.
The feeling is mutual with you, as you are a smart, confident, amazing colleague, and it is an honor and a blessing to host your podcast twice a week. Last question for you from Flex Luther 4 on Discord. My question is, can we be friends?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't ask a lot of my friends, you know. I try to be a friend to everybody, and we can be friends. Hopefully Flex Luther comes out the next time we have a open event for the SDPN for fans. I know that there's some talk about getting the Puck Talks up and running again in the Toronto area. If you're here, Flex, and if not, you know, I'm sure you'll have lots of opportunities to meet me somewhere, because I really like being out there and getting to know people and sharing our love of hockey and all things around it, because that's it's given me so much in my life, and so I'm, you know, trying to give back and share it too. You know, it's a great game, a great sport, and there's so many great people around it, whether it's other colleagues I've met, people that work for the teams, agents, players, you know, my media colleagues. I've just met so many great people through this game, and hope you're going to be one of them.
Man, that is a great way to end off the season 2 premiere of the Chris Johnston Show. Great way to dust off the cobwebs, huh?
It is. I don't know if you saw, I went through and did like every day. We're probably going to do an episode. It's a little daunting looking at it all written out, but one down, 90 something episodes to go, bud.
Oh my God. You know what's crazy? I started looking at that list too, and I guess this is just a sign of how my life has changed. There are dates I'm like, oh God, we might have to like switch them around because I might be in a different city. Normally it's you we have to think about that with, but there's a possibility that it might happen with me.
I'm sure it will, but we'll manage it. It's a work in progress always, but it's cool to see you in this new location. I'm trying to up my own game here. This microphone, I've seen some of you complaining about my mic issues. I'm going to get them figured out this season. It's not quite there today, but by episode 3, by a week from now, this microphone is going to be spot on, top quality.
Man, I can't wait for all the episodes that are going to be coming out, all the content we're going to be up for the season 2 of the Chris Johnston Show. CJ, always a pleasure to do these shows with you. We'll be back on Thursday with a brand spanking new episode. For CJ, I'm Julian, saying so long, in peace, and enjoy training camp as well.
Have a great week, everyone. It's going to be awesome.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JKMcKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.